In a quiet village, a rich man is shot dead in a locked room. The gun vanished. The crime impossible. Enter Miss Marple, a sharp-eyed old lady who knits and listens. With a broken teacup, a lavender letter, and a hidden passage, she unravels secrets of greed and love. Can you guess how she catches the killer? Chapter 1. The Locked Room Mystery. The village of St. Mary Mead was a sleepy place, tucked in the green hills of England where nothing much happened. Cottages with thatched roofs lined the single main street, and the church bell rang every Sunday, like clockwork. But on a chilly autumn morning, the village buzzed with whispers. Something terrible had happened at Grayson Manor, the big house on the hill. Sir Henry Grayson, the richest man for miles, was dead. Not just dead, and not just murdered, but killed in a way that made no sense at all. Miss Jane Marple, a small, white-haired lady with sharp blue eyes, was visiting her nephew, Raymond West, in St. Mary Mead. Raymond was a writer, always scribbling stories, and he liked to tease his aunt about her old-fashioned ways. But Miss Marple didn't mind. She knew people, and she knew how they worked, like the gears in her old knitting machine. She was sitting in the Rose and Crown tea shop, sipping a cup of Earl Grey, when the news broke. Mrs. Bantry, the village gossip, burst in, her cheeks pink with excitement. "Oh, Miss Marple," Mrs. Bantry said, plopping into the chair across from her. "Have you heard? Sir Henry's been shot, right in his study, and the door was locked from the inside. The police are up at the manor now, scratching their heads." Miss Marple set her teacup down gently. "Locked, you say?" Her voice was soft, but her eyes gleamed. She loved a puzzle, and this sounded like a good one. Mrs. Bantry nodded, her hat wobbling. "Yes. Locked tight. Windows bolted too. Number 1 could have gotten in or out. And here's the strangest part, no gun. They looked everywhere, but it's gone. It's like a ghost did it." Miss Marple smiled faintly. She didn't believe in ghosts, but she believed in people, and people, she knew, could be very clever and very foolish. "Tell me more, Dolly," she said, using Mrs. Bantry's first name to keep her talking. Mrs. Bantry leaned in, lowering her voice. "Well, Sir Henry was found this morning by his butler, Mr. Jenkins. Poor man was in a state, they say. Sir Henry was slumped over his desk, blood all over his shirt. 1 bullet, right through the heart. The police inspector Davies is in charge. It's impossible. No one heard the shot either, and the manor's full of people." Miss Marple's fingers tapped her teacup. "Full of people, you say? Who was there?" "Oh, the whole lot. Sir Henry's niece, Clara, who's been living there since her parents died. His nephew, Edward, who's always asking for money. The housekeeper, Mrs. Poole, and that young maid, Lily, who's a bit flighty, and Mr. Jenkins, of course. There was a guest, to some fancy lawyer from London, Mr. Carver. He came last night and stayed over." Miss Marple nodded, storing every name in her mind. She pictured Grayson Manor, a big, gloomy place with ivy crawling up its stone walls. Sir Henry had lived there alone for years, ever since Sanitize's wife died. He was a grumpy old man, rich as a king, but stingy. People said he kept secrets, and Miss Marple believed them. Secrets, she thought, were like weeds, they always grew back. "I think I'll take a walk up to the manor," Miss Marple said, standing and smoothing her skirt. "The air will do me good." Mrs. Bantry's eyes widened. "You're not going to poke around, are you, Jane? The police won't corner Sanitize it at all under control." Miss Marple chuckled. "Oh, Dolly, I'm just an old lady out for a stroll." But Mrs. Bantry wasn't fooled. She knew Miss Marple's strolls often led to answers no one else could find. The walk to Grayson Manor was pleasant. With leaves crunching under Miss Marple's sturdy shoes, the manor loomed ahead, its tall chimneys piercing the grey sky. A young policeman stood at the gate, looking bored. Miss Marple gave him her sweetest smile. "Good morning, officer. I'm Raymond West's aunt. Just visiting. I heard about poor Sir Henry. May I offer my condolences to the family?" The policeman, barely 20, blushed. Well, ma'am, it's a crime scene. No visitors allowed." "Of course, dear," Miss Marple said, her voice like honey. "But perhaps you could fetch Inspector Davies. I'm sure he'd want to know Raymond's aunt is here." The boy hesitated, then scurried off. Miss Marple waited, her hands folded neatly. She knew how to handle young men. They were like her nephew's spaniel, eager to please if you knew the right tone. Inspector Davies appeared, a stocky man with a mustache that looked like it belonged in a war movie. He frowned at Miss Marple. "Mrs. West, is it? I'm very busy. This is a serious investigation, Miss Marple. Actually, she corrected gently. I understand, Inspector. I only wished to see if I could help. My nephew speaks highly of your work, and I've a knack for noticing things. Perhaps I could take a peek at the study. I promised not to touch a thing. Davies sighed. He'd heard of Miss Marple, some old lady who solved crimes, though he didn't believe it. Still, she was related to Raymond West, who knew important people. Fine, he grumbled. But stay out of the way. Miss Marple followed him through the manor's heavy oak doors. The entrance hall was grand, with a chandelier glittering above a marble floor. But it felt cold, like a house that hadn't known laughter in years. Davies led her up a creaking staircase and down a long corridor lined with portraits. Sir Henry's ancestors glared down, their eyes following her. The study was at the end of the hall. A policeman stood guard outside, but Davies waved him aside and unlocked the door. Here it is, he said. Don't expect to find anything we haven't. Miss Marple stepped inside, her eyes sweeping the room. It was large, with tall windows covered by heavy curtains. A massive desk sat in the center, papers scattered across it. Sir Henry's chair was pushed back, and a dark stain marred the green blotter on the desk. Blood, Miss Marple thought, though she didn't flinch. She'd seen worse in her time. The room smelled faintly of cigar smoke, and something else, lavender perhaps. Miss Marple's nose twitched. She moved slowly, her cane tapping the floor. The windows were indeed bolted, their latches rusty from disuse. The door's lock was heavy, the kind that needed a key from either side. She tested it gently. It held firm. See, Davies said, crossing his arms. Locked tight. No way in or out. And no gun. We've torn the place apart. Miss Marple didn't answer. She crouched carefully. Her knees weren't what they used to. Beyond peered under the desk. A piece of broken china caught her eye, half hidden by the rug. She pointed. What's that, Inspector? Davies grunted and picked it up. Just a bit of a teacup, probably dropped yesterday. Perhaps, Miss Marple said, but she didn't think so. The break was fresh, the edges sharp. She moved to the fireplace, where ashes smoldered. A scrap of paper lay among them, its edges charred. She squinted, making out a few words. ... Must meet ... midnight ... Anything else, Miss Marple? Davies asked, his tone sharp. She straightened, smiling. Not yet, Inspector. But may I speak with the butler? Mr. Jenkins, I believe. Davies rolled his eyes, but sent for Jenkins. The butler arrived, a thin man with grey hair and nervous hands. He bowed slightly. Madame. Mr. Jenkins, Miss Marple said kindly. You found Sir Henry this morning? Yes. What time was that? About 7, ma'am, Jenkins said, his voice shaky. I brought his tea, like always. The door was locked, so I used my key. That's when I saw him, slumped over, blood everywhere. He shuddered. And was anything unusual? Miss Marple asked. Anything out of place? Jenkins hesitated. Well, the teacup was broken. I noticed it on the floor. And the room felt odd, like someone had been there. Davies snorted. Imagination, Jenkins. You were in shock. Miss Marple ignored him. Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. You've been most helpful. As Jenkins left, Miss Marple took one last look around. The lavender scent lingered, faint but unmistakable. She thought of her friend, Mrs. Clement, who wore lavender perfume and always left a trail of it. Could it be a woman's scent, or something else? Finished? Davies asked, tapping his foot. For now, Miss Marple said. Thank you, Inspector. I'll let you know if I think of anything. He muttered something under his breath, but Miss Marple didn't mind. She left the manor, her mind buzzing like a beehive. The locked room, the missing gun, the broken teacup, the lavender, the burned letter. It was a tangle, but tangles could be undone. She thought of her knitting, how a single loose thread could unravel a whole sweater. She just needed to find the right thread. Back at Raymond's cottage, she sat by the fire, her knitting needles clicking. Raymond looked up from his typewriter. Well, Aunt Jane, solved the crime yet? She chuckled. Not quite, dear, but it's a start. Raymond shook his head. A locked room, no gun, no witnesses. Even you can't crack this one. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. We'll see, Raymond, we'll see. She leaned back, her mind sorting the clues. Sir Henry had enemies: his niece, Clara, who needed money for her sick mother; his nephew, Edward, who gambled too much; the housekeeper, Mrs. Poole, who'd worked for him for 20 years and might know his secrets; and the lawyer, Mr. Carver. What was he doing here? Then there was the lavender and the letter. A meeting at midnight. With whom? Miss Marple knew the village would talk. By tomorrow, every shop and pub would have a theory. She'd listen, as she always did, picking up bits and pieces like crumbs. People loved to talk, and talk revealed truth. For now, she knitted, her needles moving in rhythm. The puzzle was hard, but not impossible. Nothing was impossible. Not to Miss Jane Marple. She'd find the answer, one stitch at a time. Chapter 2. The Curious Clues. Miss Jane Marple woke early the next morning, the sun barely peeking over the hills of St. Mary Mead. Her nephew Raymond's cottage was cozy, with a fire crackling in the hearth, but her mind was already at Grayson Manor, the locked room, the missing gun, the broken teacup. They danced in her thoughts like a jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces gone. She dressed in her usual tweed skirt and cardigan, pinned her hat in place, and set out for the manor. Inspector Davies had grudgingly agreed to let her visit again, mostly because he thought she'd find nothing. Miss Marple knew better. The walk was brisk, the autumn air sharp with the smell of damp leaves. Grayson Manor loomed ahead, its grey stone walls looking even gloomier in the morning mist. The young policeman at the gate recognized her and waved her through, though he gave her a curious look. Inside, the manor was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like a house holding its breath. A maid Lily, Miss Marple recalled, scurried past, her eyes red from crying. Miss Marple made a note of that. Grief could mean many things. Inspector Davies met her in the entrance hall, his mustache twitching with impatience. Back again, Miss Marple. I've got a dozen men combing this place. We don't need an old lady's guesses. Miss Marple smiled sweetly. Oh, I'm sure you're very thorough, Inspector. I only want to look at the study once more. Sometimes a fresh pair of eyes helps. Davies muttered something about wasting time but led her upstairs. The study door was still guarded, and the room looked much as it had yesterday. Sir Henry's blood stained the desk blotter, a grim reminder of the crime. The curtains were drawn back now, letting pale light spill across the oak floor. Miss Marple moved slowly, her cane tapping softly. She didn't believe in rushing. Clues, like shy children, needed coaxing. She started with the desk, running her fingers lightly over the scattered papers. Bills, letters, a ledger with neat rows of numbers. Sir Henry had been a careful man with his money. One letter caught her eye, half hidden under a book. It was addressed to Sir Henry in a looping, feminine hand. She lifted it carefully, noting the faint scent of lavender. The paper was thick, expensive, but the ink was smudged, as if written in a hurry. The words were few. We must talk. Midnight. You know where. No signature. Inspector, Miss Marple called, holding up the letter. Have you seen this? Davies strode over, squinting. Just a note, probably nothing. We found dozens of letters. The old man got mail from everyone. Perhaps, Miss Marple said, but she slipped the letter into her handbag when Davies turned away. She'd return it later, of course, but she wanted to study it. Lavender again. It nagged at her, like a tune she couldn't quite place. Next, she moved to the fireplace. The ashes were cold now, but she poked at them with her cane. The burned paper she'd seen yesterday was still there, its edges black. She crouched, ignoring the ache in her knees, and teased out a larger fragment. More words. ... Debts ... Promise ... Danger ... The handwriting matched the letter in her bag. Someone had been desperate to destroy this note, but not careful enough. Miss Marple stood, brushing ash from her gloves. Her eyes drifted to the broken teacup under the desk. She knelt again, picking up a shard. The china was delicate, painted with tiny roses. Odd, she thought. Sir Henry didn't seem the type for fancy teacups. She tucked the shard into her pocket, promising herself to ask about it. The windows came next. She tested each bolt, her fingers tracing the rusty metal. No one had opened these in years. Dust coated the sills, undisturbed, but something glinted in the corner of one sill, half hidden by the curtain. She leaned closer, her glasses slipping down her nose. A tiny bead, no, bigger than a pinhead, sparkling in the light. She picked it up, rolling it between her fingers. Glass, perhaps from a necklace or dress. She added it to her pocket, her collection of clues growing. Davies watched her, arms crossed. Find anything, Miss Marple? Or are you just playing detective? She smiled, unruffled. Just looking, Inspector. May I speak with the household? It might help to hear their stories. He sighed but nodded. Fine, but don't stir them up. They're jumpy enough. Miss Marple followed him to the drawing room, where the household had gathered. Clara Grayson, Sir Henry's niece, sat by the window, her dark hair pulled back tightly. She was young, maybe 25, with a pale face and nervous hands. Edward Grayson, the nephew, sprawled in an armchair, his suit rumpled. He was older, nearing 30, with a lazy smile that didn't reach his eyes. Mrs. Poole, the housekeeper, stood stiffly by the door, her grey dress starched to perfection. Lily, the maid, hovered near her, twisting a handkerchief. Mr. Carver, the lawyer from London, sat apart, his briefcase at his feet. He was a sharp-faced man, watching everyone like a hawk. Davies cleared his throat. "This is Miss Marple. She's helping answer her questions." Clara spoke first, her voice tight. "What do you want to know?" "Uncle Henry's dead, and we're all sick about it." Miss Marple sat, folding her hands. "I'm so sorry. My dear, can you tell me about last night? Where were you?" Clara hesitated. "In my room, reading. I went to bed early. I didn't hear anything." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes kind but sharp. "And you, Mr. Grayson?" Edward shrugged, his smile flickering. "I was in the billiard room, playing a few rounds. Alone, before you ask." The house was quiet. Mrs. Poole spoke up, her voice flat. "I was in the kitchen, checking the silver. Lily was with me until 9, then she went to bed." Lily nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am. I was asleep by 10. Mr. Carver adjusted his glasses. "I was in the guest room, working on papers. Sir Henry asked me to review his will. I heard nothing unusual." Miss Marple listened, her face calm. Their stories were tidy. Too tidy. People lied when they were scared, and this room reeked of fear. She decided to nudge them. "How curious," she said, her voice mild. "A teacup was broken in the study. Does anyone know about that?" Clara's hands twitched. Edward's smile faltered. Mrs. Poole's lips thinned, and Lily gasped softly. Mr. Carver's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. "No one." Miss Marple pressed, her tone gentle. "It was such a pretty cup, with roses." Mrs. Poole spoke sharply. "Sir Henry didn't use teacups. He drank coffee, black. That cup wasn't his." Miss Marple nodded, storing that away. "Thank you. And the lavender scent in the study, does anyone know about that?" Silence. Clara's cheeks flushed, and Edward shifted in his seat. Lily looked at the floor, her handkerchief a crumpled mess. Miss Marple didn't push further. She'd rattled them enough. "Thank you all," she said, standing. "I won't keep you." Davies escorted her out, grumbling. "Waste of time. They're just upset, not hiding anything." "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, but she didn't believe it. People always hid something. Back in the village, Miss Marple stopped at the post office. Mrs. Muggins, the postmistress, loved to chat, and Miss Marple knew how to listen. Over a cup of tea, Mrs. Muggins spilled the latest gossip. "Sir Henry was a strange one," she said, stirring sugar into her cup. "Always getting letters, some from London, some from goodness-knows-where. A few smelled funny, like flowers. And last week, I saw a stranger at the station, a tall man in a dark coat. He asked for the manor, then vanished." Miss Marple's ears pricked up. "Flowers, you say, like lavender?" Mrs. Muggins nodded. "Exactly. Fancy paper, too. I thought it was odd for a man like Sir Henry." Miss Marple thanked her and left, her mind spinning. The lavender-scented letter, the stranger, the burned note, they were threads, and she was starting to see a pattern. She walked to the church, where the vicar's wife, Mrs. Clement, was arranging flowers. Mrs. Clement wore lavender perfume, but Miss Marple doubted she'd written to Sir Henry. Still, she asked about the manor. "Oh, it's dreadful," Mrs. Clement said, snipping a rose. "But Sir Henry wasn't liked. He argued with everyone, Clara, Edward, even Mrs. Poole, and that lawyer, Mr. Carver. He's been here before, years ago. Something about a will." Miss Marple nodded, adding that to her mental ledger. She spent the afternoon wandering the village, chatting with the baker, the butcher, and the seamstress, Miss Hartnell. Each had a tidbit. Clara had been seen crying in the garden. Edward owed money to a man in London, and Mrs. Poole had once worked for Sir Henry's wife. Miss Hartnell mentioned something else, a cloaked figure near the manor 2 nights ago, slipping through the trees. "Couldn't see their face," Miss Hartnell said, threading a needle. "But they moved fast, like they didn't want to be seen." Miss Marple thanked her and headed back to Raymond's cottage. The sun was setting, painting the sky red. She sat by the fire, pulling out her clues, the letter, the teacup shard, the glass bead. She studied the letter again, holding it to the light. The paper was watermarked, a faint crest she didn't recognize. The teacup shard was thin, almost translucent. The bead sparkled, catching the FIRELIGHT dot. Raymond looked up from his typewriter, still playing Detective Aunt Jane. You look like a cat with a mouse. She chuckled, just thinking, dear, this case is like my knitting tangled, but there's a way to unravel it. He laughed. A locked room, no gun, and a dead man. Good luck. Miss Marple didn't need luck. She had her clues, her wits, and a lifetime of watching people. The lavender scent was the key. She was sure someone had been in that study, someone who left a trail of perfume in broken china. Clara, Mrs. Poole, or someone else, like the cloaked figure. And what about the stranger at the station? She leaned back, her knitting needles clicking. The manor was full of secrets, and secrets were like cracks in a wall. Tap them gently, and the whole thing could come down. Tomorrow, she'd tap a little harder. Chapter 3, Whispers in the Village. The morning sun crept over St. Mary Mead, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets. Miss Jane Marple sat at Raymond's kitchen table, sipping tea and staring at her small pile of clues. The letter, the broken teacup shard, and the tiny glass bead. Each was a piece of the puzzle, but the picture was still blurry. Sir Henry Grayson's murder in a locked room, with no gun and no clear motive, was a knot she hadn't untied yet. But Miss Marple loved knots. They always came loose if you pulled the right thread. She tucked the clues into her handbag, pinned on her hat, and stepped out into the crisp autumn air. The village was awake, buzzing with talk about the murder. Miss Marple knew gossip was like a river. It carried truth if you knew where to look. Today, she'd dip her toes in that river, visiting shops and neighbors to hear what St. Mary Mead had to say. Her first stop was the bakery, where Mr. Pock kneaded dough behind the counter. His wife, Mrs. Pock, was sweeping crumbs, her eyes bright with news. Miss Marple bought a loaf of bread, smiling warmly. Terrible business at the manor, she said, her voice soft. Have you heard anything, Mrs. Polk? Mrs. Polk leaned in, her broom forgotten. Oh, Miss Marple, it's all anyone talks about. They say Sir Henry was shot, but the room was locked tight. No one knows how it happened. My cousin's boy works at the manor stables, and he says the staff are scared stiff. That maid, Lily, was crying all day yesterday. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes kind but sharp. Poor girl. Was she close to Sir Henry? Mrs. Polk shrugged. Not that I know, but she's young, only 16, probably just frightened. Though, ... She lowered her voice. My cousin says Lily saw something odd the night before the murder. A man in a dark coat, sneaking around the manor grounds. She told Mrs. Poole, but the housekeeper shushed her. Miss Marple's fingers tightened on her handbag. A man in a dark coat. Mrs. Muggins had mentioned a stranger at the station. How curious, she said. Did Lily say anything else? Not to me, Mrs. Pock said. But you know how girls are. They see shadows and make stories. Miss Marple thanked her and left, the bread warm under her arm. Lily was young, yes, but young eyes often saw what older ones missed. She made a note to talk to the maid later. For now, she headed to the butcher's shop, where Mr. Giles was chopping meat with a cleaver. He was a gruff man, but his daughter Annie was chatty. Miss Marple asked for a small cut of beef, then turned the talk to the manor. Sir Henry's death has upset everyone, she said, folding her hands. Annie, you're friendly with Clara Grayson, aren't you? How's she holding up? Annie, wiping her hands on her apron, sighed. Clara's a wreck, Miss Marple. I saw her yesterday, walking by the stream. She looked like she hadn't slept. She said she feels guilty, like she could have stopped it. I told her, that's silly. How could she know? Miss Marple tilted her head. Guilty. Did she say why? Annie hesitated, glancing at her father. Well, she mentioned an argument with her uncle a few days ago. Something about money. Clara's mother is sick, you know, and Clara asked Sir Henry for help with Dr. Bills. He said no, called her a leech. She was so angry. She cried telling me. Miss Marple's heart ached for Clara, but her mind stayed clear. Anger could turn to desperation, and desperation could turn to worse. Poor dear, she said. Did Clara mention anyone else? Visitors, perhaps? Annie shook her head. Not really, though she did say, Edward's been acting strange. He's her cousin, you know. Always borrowing money from Sir Henry, then gambling it away. Clara said he was at the manor all week, pestering her uncle. Miss Marple thanked Annie and left, her mind spinning. Clara's guilt, Edward's greed, Lily's stranger each was a thread, weaving a pattern she couldn't yet see. She crossed the street to Miss Hartnell's dress shop, where the seamstress was pinning a hem. Miss Hartnell was sharp but observant, and Miss Marple knew she'd have something to say. "Good morning, Miss Hartnell," Miss Marple said, admiring a bolt of blue fabric. "I'm sure you've heard about Sir Henry. The village is full of talk." Miss Hartnell snorted, her needle flashing. "Talk? It's a circus. Everyone's got a theory. I say it's that nephew, Edward. He's a no-good sort, always in debt. But the locked room, that's a mystery. I saw something odd myself, night before last. A figure in a cloak, slipping through the trees near the manor. Couldn't see their face, but they were up to no good. Mark my words." Miss Marple's pulse quickened. "A cloak, you say? Man or woman?" "Hard to tell," Miss Hartnell admitted. "It was dark, and they moved fast, but I told the constable, for all the good it did. He said I was seeing things." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. A cloaked figure, a man in a dark coat, were they the same? Or were there two strangers lurking around Grayson Manor? She thanked Miss Hartnell and stepped outside, pausing to think. The lavender scent from the study nagged at her. She pulled the letter from her handbag, sniffing it again. Definitely lavender, faint but clear. She remembered Mrs. Clement's perfume, but Mrs. Clement had no reason to write to Sir Henry. Could it be Clara, Mrs. Poole, or someone outside the manor? Her next stop was the Rose and Crown tea shop, where Mrs. Bantry held court. Miss Marple found her friend at a corner table, surrounded by village women. Mrs. Bantry waved her over, her hat feathers bouncing. "Jane, you're just in time," Mrs. Bantry said. "We're talking about the murder. Everyone's got a guess, but no one knows how it was done. A locked room. It's like something from one of Raymond's stories." Miss Marple sat, accepting a cup of tea. "It is puzzling," she said. "Have you heard anything new, Dolly?" Mrs. Bantry leaned in, her voice low. "Plenty. The milkman says he saw Edward Grayson in the village pub 2 nights ago, drunk and muttering about getting what's owed. And Mrs. Giles, the butcher's wife, says Clara was buying medicine for her mother last week, looking like she'd seen a ghost. Oh, and the postmistress, Mrs. Muggins, says Sir Henry got a letter with a London postmark last month, sealed with red wax. Smelled like perfume, she said. Lavender?" Miss Marple asked, her voice casual. Mrs. Bantry's eyes widened. "How did you know?" "Yes, lavender." Mrs. Muggins said it was odd for a man like Sir Henry. He wasn't the flowery type. Miss Marple sipped her tea, hiding her excitement. The lavender letter in her bag matched Mrs. Muggins' story. But who sent it? And why was it hidden under a book in the study? She listened as the women chattered, picking up more crumbs. The vicar's wife mentioned Mr. Carver, the lawyer, who'd visited the manor years ago during a family dispute. The baker's daughter said Mrs. Poole had been seen arguing with Sir Henry last month, her face red with anger. Each tidbit was a clue, small but sharp. Miss Marple left the tea shop, her head full. She decided to visit the church, where Mrs. Clement was polishing the pews. Mrs. Clement was kind but nosy, and Miss Marple hoped she'd heard something useful. She found her friend near the altar, a rag in her hand. "Jane, what a surprise," Mrs. Clement said, smiling. "Come to pray for poor Sir Henry." Miss Marple chuckled. "Perhaps later. I'm curious about the manor. You know everyone. Mary, have you heard anything about visitors there?" Mrs. Clement's eyes gleamed. "Well, I shouldn't gossip, but the gardener's boy told me he saw a man near the manor last week, late at night, tall, with a scarf over his face. He ran off when the boy called out. And Clara's been so quiet lately, not herself at all. I saw her in the churchyard yesterday, staring at her mother's grave." Miss Marple nodded, her mind ticking. Another stranger, or the same one, and Clara, at the grave, grief or something deeper. She thanked Mrs. Clement and left, her cane tapping the path. The village was a web of whispers, and she was catching every thread. But she needed more. She needed to talk to Lily. She headed to Grayson Manor, hoping to find the maid. The young policeman at the gate let her in, used to her visits. Inside, the manor was still, the air thick with tension. Miss Marple found Lily in the kitchen, peeling potatoes. The girl jumped when she saw her, her eyes wide. "Miss Marple, I didn't hear you," Lily stammered, dropping her knife. "I'm sorry, dear," Miss Marple said, her voice gentle. "I just wanted a word. You've had a hard time, haven't you?" Lily nodded, tears welling. "It's awful, ma'am. Sir Henry was stern, but I never thought he'd be killed." Miss Marple sat, patting the chair beside her. Tell me, Lily, did you see anything strange? The night before, perhaps? Lily bit her lip, glancing at the door. I shouldn't say. Mrs. Poole told me to keep quiet. Miss Marple leaned closer, her eyes kind. You can tell me, dear. I won't tell a soul. Lily hesitated, then whispered, I saw a man, outside, by the rose garden. It was dark, but he wore a long coat. He was looking at the study window. I told Mrs. Poole, but she said it was just a tramp and to hush. Miss Marple's heart raced, but her face stayed calm. You're very brave, Lily. Did you see anything else? In the study? Maybe? Lily shook her head. No, ma'am, I don't go in there. But there was a teacup on the tray when I took Sir Henry's coffee that night. I thought it was odd. He never drinks tea. Miss Marple's fingers tightened on her cane. The teacup, again. Thank you, Lily. You've been a great help. She left the kitchen, her mind buzzing. The man in the coat, the cloaked figure, the lavender letter, the teacup, they were connected. She was sure, but how? She walked back to Raymond's cottage, the sky darkening with clouds. A storm was coming, but Miss Marple didn't mind. Storms cleared the air, and she needed clarity. At the cottage, she sat by the fire, pulling out her clues. The letters, words, we must talk. Midnight. You know where, echoed in her mind. A secret meeting, perhaps. The burned note mentioned debts and danger. Sir Henry had enemies, and someone had wanted him dead. But the locked room, the missing gunnet, was a clever trick, meant to fool everyone. Raymond looked up from his typewriter, grinning, still chasing ghosts. Aunt Jane. The police say it's unsolvable. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Nothing's unsolvable, dear. It's just a matter of listening. She picked up her knitting, her needles clicking. The village had given her plenty to think about. Tomorrow, she'd dug a few more threads, starting with Clara and that argument over money. The truth was out there, hiding in the whispers. Miss Marple would find it, one stitch at a time. Chapter 4. The Hidden Mechanism. Miss Jane Marple woke to the patter of rain on Raymond's cottage roof, the air heavy with the smell of wet earth. St. Mary Mead was grey and quiet, but her mind was bright with questions. The locked room murder of Sir Henry Grayson gnawed at her like a stubborn knot in her knitting. The lavender-scented letter, the broken teacup, the glass bead, the cloaked figure, they were clues, but they didn't yet fit. Today, she'd return to Grayson Manor to hunt for the missing piece. She dressed in her tweed coat, pinned her hat against the drizzle, and set out, her cane splashing through puddles. The manor's stone walls loomed through the mist, grim and silent. The young policeman at the gate, now used to Miss Marple's visits, tipped his cap and let her pass. Inside, the air was cold, the grand hall echoing with the drip of a leaky roof. Inspector Davies met her at the foot of the stairs, his mustache drooping with annoyance. You again, Miss Marple, he said, hands on his hips. We've searched every inch of that study. There's nothing left to find. Miss Marple smiled, her eyes twinkling. Oh, Inspector, sometimes the smallest things hide in plain sight. May I take another look? I promise to be quick. Davies sighed, rubbing his temples. Fine, but don't touch anything. And don't expect miracles. He led her to the study, unlocking the heavy door. The room was, as she remembered, the blood-stained desk, the bolted windows, the faint lavender scent, lingering like a ghost. Rain tapped the glass, casting shadows across the oak floor. Miss Marple moved slowly, her cane steady, her senses sharp. She wasn't looking for big clues today. She wanted the quiet ones, the ones everyone else missed. She started with the bookshelf, a towering thing crammed with leather-bound volumes. Sir Henry had been a reader, or at least liked to look like one. She ran her fingers along the spines, feeling for anything odd. Near the bottom shelf, her hand brushed a panel that felt loose, not like the solid wood around it. She pressed gently, and with a soft click, the panel popped open, revealing a narrow gap behind the shelf. Her heart quickened, but she kept her face calm. Inspector, she called, her voice mild. Have you seen this? Davies strode over, peering into the gap. What's that? A secret compartment. Miss Marple tilted her head, studying the space. It was barely a foot wide, too small for a person to squeeze through, but it ran behind the wall, disappearing into shadow. Not a compartment, she said. A passage. Small, but clever. Davies snorted, crouching to look. Clever. It's useless. No one could fit through there. And we checked the walls, no hidden doors. Miss Marple nodded, but her mind raced. A passage didn't need to fit a person. It could carry something else, a gun, perhaps. pulled away by a string or wire. She pictured the missing murder weapon, spirited out of the locked room to baffle the police. It was a trick, like the ones in Raymond's detective stories, but real. She stepped back, scanning the room. The broken teacup still puzzled her. She knelt carefully, her knees creaking, and picked up another shard from under the desk. The rose pattern gleamed in the dim light. Lily had said Sir Henry never drank tea, yet here was a teacup, smashed in the study. Miss Marple tucked the shard into her pocket, next to the glass bead and the lavender letter. Next, she moved to the fireplace. The burned paper was gone, likely swept away by the police, but she poked the ashes anyway. Nothing new. The lavender scent was stronger here, though, near the hearth. She sniffed, her nose twitching. It wasn't just perfume, it was sharper, like lavender oil, the kind used in soaps or candles. She filed that away, a tiny thread in her growing web. The windows were her last stop. She checked the bolts again, confirming they were rusted shut, but the glass bead she'd found yesterday nagged at her. She pulled it from her pocket, holding it to the light. It sparkled, tiny and perfect, like something from a lady's dress. Clara, Mrs. Poole, or someone else. She needed to know more. About the household. Finished? Davies asked, tapping his foot. I told you, there's nothing here. Miss Marple smiled. Just one more thing, Inspector. May I speak with Mrs. Poole? She might know about this passage. Davies rolled his eyes but sent for the housekeeper. Mrs. Poole arrived, her grey dress crisp, her face as stiff as a board. She stood by the door, hands clasped, watching Miss Marple like a cat watches a mouse. Mrs. Poole, Miss Marple said, her voice warm, this is a lovely old house. Have you ever noticed that panel behind the bookshelf? Mrs. Poole's eyes flickered to the shelf, then back. No, ma'am, I cleaned the rooms, not the walls. Sir Henry liked his privacy. Miss Marple nodded, undeterred. Of course. And the teacup in here, do you know where it came from? It's such a pretty pattern. Mrs. Poole's lips thinned. I told you before, Sir Henry didn't use teacups. Maybe Lily brought it by mistake. She's careless. Miss Marple tilted her head. Perhaps. And the lavender scent. I've noticed it here. Do you use lavender in the house? Mrs. Poole stiffened, her hands tightening. Not that I know of. Maybe it's from the garden. We have lavender bushes. Miss Marple thanked her, noting the housekeeper's unease. Mrs. Poole knew more than she was saying, but pushing now would only make her clam up. Miss Marple left the study, Davies locking the door behind her. The passage was the key. She was sure, not for a person, but for the gun. Someone had planned this murder carefully, using the manor's secrets to hide their tracks. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the air fresh and sharp. Miss Marple walked to the village, her mind buzzing. The passage suggested a trick, but the lavender and teacup hinted at a person, someone who'd been in the study. Maybe during that midnight meeting mentioned in the letter. She needed to test her theory. But first, she'd gather more whispers from St. Mary Mead. Her first stop was the post office, where Mrs. Muggins was sorting letters. Miss Marple bought a stamp, then leaned on the counter, her smile disarming. Such a sad time, Mrs. Muggins, she said. You must hear all sorts of news. Any more about that stranger at the station? Mrs. Muggins' eyes lit up. Oh, Miss Marple, I was just telling the milkman. That man in the dark coat, he wasn't just passing through. Saw him again, 2 nights ago, near the Manor Road. He had a scarf over his face, like he didn't want to be recognized. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. How interesting. And those perfumed letters, Sir Henry got any more of those? Mrs. Muggins nodded, lowering her voice. One came last week, same lavender smell, same fancy paper. From London, I think. I told the police, but they didn't care. Miss Marple thanked her, and left, her thoughts swirling. The stranger, the lavender letters, the cloaked figure, Miss Hartnell saw. They were circling the same truth. Someone, outside the manor, was involved. Someone Sir Henry knew, but who? She headed to the church, where Mrs. Clement was arranging him, and Miss Marple sat in a pew, folding her hands. Mary, you always know what's happening. Have you heard anything about secret passages at the manor? Mrs. Clement's eyebrows rose. Passages? Not exactly, but my grandfather worked there, years ago, and he said the house was full of odd corners, hidden panels, old servant tunnels. The Graysons were a sneaky lot, always hiding things. Miss Marple nodded, her theory growing. The passage behind the bookshelf was part of the manor's design, used by someone who knew it well. She thanked Mrs. Clement, and moved on to the Rose and Crown tea shop, where Mrs. Bantry was holding court. Jane, Mrs. Bantry called, waving her over. You're up to something, I can tell. What's the latest on the murder? Miss Marple sat, accepting a scone, just thinking. Dolly, have you heard anything about the man's history? Old passages, perhaps? Mrs. Bantry's eyes sparkled. Oh yes, my aunt used to visit the Graysons, and she said the house was like a maze. Secret doors, hidden rooms, perfect for mischief. And Clara told me once that Sir Henry kept his study locked because he didn't trust anyone. Maybe he knew about a passage. Miss Marple sipped her tea, hiding her excitement. Clara's comment was a clue she'd talk to the niece soon. For now, she listened as Mrs. Bantry rattled off more gossip. Edward's gambling debts were worse than anyone thought. Mr. Carver had been seen arguing with Sir Henry last month, and Lily had dropped a tray of dishes yesterday, too nervous to work. Miss Marple left the tea shop, her handbag heavy with clues. She stopped by Miss Hartnell's dress shop, hoping to learn more about the cloaked figure. Miss Hartnell was hemming a skirt, her mouth full of pins. Miss Marple, she mumbled, spitting out a pin, still poking around. I told you about that cloaked figure. I swear it was a woman, something about the way they moved, all graceful. Miss Marple's heart skipped. A woman. That fit with the lavender and the teacup. Did you see anything else? She asked. Miss Hartnell shook her head. Too dark, but I'd bet my best needle it was someone from the manor. They knew the grounds too well. Miss Marple thanked her and headed back to Raymond's cottage. The rain starting again, she sat by the fire, pulling out her clues. The lavender letter, the teacup shard, the glass bead, they pointed to a woman, someone who'd been in the study. The passage pointed to a trick, a way to vanish the gun. But how did they connect? She opened the letter, reading it again. We must talk. Midnight, you know where. The burned notes, words, debts. Danger hinted at a secret Sir Henry kept. Had he been blackmailing someone? Clara, with her sick mother. Edward, with his debts. Or someone else, like the stranger in the dark coat. Miss Marple leaned back, her knitting needles clicking. The passage was a breakthrough, but it wasn't enough. She needed to test her idea. Tomorrow, she'd talk to Clara and Lily again, and maybe Mr. Carver. Someone in the manor knew about that passage, and someone had used it to commit an impossible crime. Raymond looked up from his typewriter, grinning. Still chasing your locked room, Aunt Jane. The police are calling it a dead end. Miss Marple smiled, her eyes sharp. Dead ends are just doors waiting to be opened, dear. She knitted on, her mind weaving the clues. The manor was a puzzle, but puzzles had solutions. She'd find this one careful stitch at a time. Chapter 5. Unraveling motives. The rain had cleared by morning, leaving St. Mary Mead sparkling under a pale autumn sun. Miss Jane Marple sat at Raymond's kitchen table, her tea cooling as she turned her clues over in her mind. The lavender letter, the broken teacup shard, the glass bead, the hidden passage behind the bookshelf. They were pieces of a puzzle, but the edges didn't yet match. Sir Henry Grayson's murder in a locked room, with no gun and no clear culprit, was a tangle, but Miss Marple knew tangles. They always unraveled if you tugged gently. Today, she'd tug a little harder. The village whispers had given her plenty. Clara's guilt, Edward's debts, Lily's stranger, the cloaked figure, but whispers weren't proof. She needed to hear from the manor's household again, to watch their eyes and catch their hesitations. People lied when they were scared, and fear was a crack in the wall. Miss Marple was good at finding cracks. She dressed in her usual tweed skirt and cardigan, pinned her hat, and tucked her clues into her handbag. The walk to Grayson Manor was brisk, the air sharp with the scent of wet grass. The manor's grey walls loomed ahead, its windows glinting like wary eyes. The young policeman at the gate waved her through, no longer surprised by her visits. Inside, the hall was quiet, the chandelier casting dim light on the marble floor. Miss Marple's cane tapped softly as she climbed the stairs, her mind already at work. Inspector Davies wasn't there, off chasing leads in the village. A maid said so. Miss Marple had the run of the place. Within reason, she decided to start with the household, not the study. Clues weren't just in rooms, they were in people. She found Clara Grayson in the drawing room, staring out a window at the soggy garden. Clara's face was pale, her dark hair pulled back tightly, her hands twisting a handkerchief. "Good morning, Clara," Miss Marple said, her voice warm. "May I sit with you?" Clara started, then nodded. "Of course, Miss Marple, it's a hard time." Miss Marple sat, folding her hands. "I know, dear. Losing your uncle must be awful. Can you tell me about him? What was he like?" Clara's eyes flickered. wary but tired. Uncle Henry was difficult. He was kind when I was little, but after Aunt Mary died, he changed. He got mean, stingy. He didn't trust anyone. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes kind but sharp. That must have been hard, living here. I heard you argued with him recently about your mother's doctor bills. Clara's cheeks flushed, her hands tightening. Who told you that? Yes, we argued. Mother's sick, and the treatments cost a fortune. I asked Uncle Henry for help, just a loan. He laughed, said I was after his money. I was so angry. She stopped, biting her lip. Miss Marple leaned closer, her voice gentle. You what, dear? Clara shook her head, tears welling. I said I hated him. I didn't mean it, but now he's dead, and I feel like it's my fault. Miss Marple patted her hand, but her mind was racing. Guilt could mean grief for something deeper. You're not to blame, Clara. Did you see anyone unusual that night? A stranger, perhaps? Clara hesitated, then shook her head. No. I was in my room, reading. I didn't hear anything. Miss Marple nodded, storing that away. Clara's story hadn't changed, but her nervousness had. She thanked her and moved on, finding Edward Grayson in the billiard room, a cigarette dangling from his lips. He was leaning over the table, cue in hand, his suit as rumpled as ever. Mr. Grayson, Miss Marple said, smiling. May I have a word? Edward straightened, his lazy smile flickering. Sure, Miss Marple, what's this about? Still playing detective? Miss Marple chuckled, settling into a chair. Just curious, dear. You were close to your uncle, weren't you? Did he ever mention anything odd? Secret meetings, maybe? Edward's smile faded, his eyes narrowing. Uncle Henry. He didn't share much. Kept to himself, always locking his study. I was here that night, playing billiards. Didn't hear a thing. Miss Marple tilted her head. I heard you needed money. Gambling debts, perhaps? That must have been hard, with Sir Henry so... Careful. Edward's jaw tightened, but he laughed. Village gossip, huh? Yeah, I asked him for a loan. He said no, called me a fool. Doesn't mean I killed him. Miss Marple nodded, watching his hands. They shook slightly, betraying his cool tone. Of course not. Did you notice anything in the study? A teacup, maybe, or a lavender scent? Edward blinked, then shrugged. No, I don't go in there. Uncle Henry's rules. Miss Marple thanked him and left, her thoughts churning. Edward was hiding something, his debts, maybe more. She found Mrs. Poole in the kitchen, overseeing Lily as the maid scrubbed pots. Mrs. Poole's gray dress was spotless, her face stern. Mrs. Poole, Miss Marple said, her voice mild. May I ask you something? That teacup in the study, it's still puzzling me. Could it have been yours? Mrs. Poole's eyes flashed, but her voice stayed flat. I told you, Sir Henry didn't use teacups. If it was there, Lily must left it. She's clumsy. Lily, hearing her name, dropped a pot with a clang. I didn't, ma'am, I swear. Miss Marple smiled at the girl. It's all right, Lily. Did you see anyone with a teacup that night? Or smell lavender, perhaps? Lily shook her head, her cheeks red. No, ma'am. I took Sir Henry's coffee, like always. No tea. Mrs. Poole cut in. Sharp. Enough, Lily. Get back to work. Miss Marple nodded, noting Mrs. Poole's quick defense. The housekeeper was protective, but why? She thanked them and sought out Mr. Carver, the lawyer, who was in the library, poring over papers. His sharp face softened slightly at her approach. Miss Marple, he said, adjusting his glasses. I hear you're helping the police. What do you want with me? Miss Marple sat, her hands folded. Just a chat, Mr. Carver. You were reviewing Sir Henry's will. Yes. Did he mention any worries? Enemies, perhaps? Carver's lips twitched, almost a smile. Sir Henry had plenty of enemies. He was a hard man, ruthless with money. But he didn't share details, even with me. I was here to update his will, that's all. Miss Marple tilted her head. And that night, did you notice anything odd? A scent, maybe? Carver's eyes narrowed, but he shook his head. Nothing. I was in my room, working. The house was quiet. Miss Marple thanked him, her mind ticking. Carver was smooth, too smooth. Everyone's story was neat, but neatness hid lies. She needed to shake things up. Back at Raymond's cottage, she hatched a plan. A tea party, she decided, would bring the household together. Let her watch them closely. People let things slip over tea. She sent invitations to the manor, asking Clara, Edward, Mrs. Poole, Lily, and Mr. Carver, to join her at the Rose and Crown tea shop that afternoon. She told Mrs. Bantry, knowing her friend would spread the word. By noon, the village was buzzing about Miss Marple's little gathering. Inspector Davies, back from his errands, called her meddling but didn't stop her. He was starting to wonder if the old lady might be onto something. At 3 o'clock, the tea shop was ready, tables set with scones and jam. Mrs. Bantry played hostess, her hat feathers bouncing as she greeted everyone. Clara arrived first, her face pale, followed by Edward, who looked bored. Mrs. Poole and Lily came together, the housekeeper's eyes darting. Mr. Carver was last, his briefcase clutched like a shield. Miss Marple stood, smiling. Thank you all for coming. I know it's a sad time, but tea brings us together. Let's share memories of Sir Henry, shall we? Clara spoke first, her voice shaky. He was strict, but he took me in when my parents died. I'll miss him. Edward snorted, lighting a cigarette. Miss him, he was a miser. Never gave me a penny unless I begged. Mrs. Poole's lips thinned. He was a good employer. Kept the manor running smoothly. Lily said nothing, her hands twisting her apron. Mr. Carver sipped his tea, silent but watchful. Miss Marple let the talk flow, her eyes moving from face to face. Then she nudged, gently. It's so strange about that teacup, she said. But a scone, broken in the study, with roses on it. And that lavender scent, does anyone know where it came from? Clara's cup rattled in its saucer. Edward stubbed out his cigarette, too quickly. Mrs. Poole's hand froze, her teaspoon hovering. Lily gasped, then covered her mouth. Carver's eyes flicked to Miss Marple, sharp and cold. No one. Miss Marple pressed, her voice sweet. It's such a mystery. And that hidden passage behind the bookshelf, did Sir Henry ever mention it? The room went still. Clara's cheeks flushed. Edward coughed, reaching for his tea. Mrs. Poole's face was a mask, but her knuckles were white. Lily looked at the floor, trembling. Carver set his cup down, his smile thin. Passage, he said, his tone light. First I've heard of it. Miss Marple nodded, as if it were nothing. Just a small one, behind the shelf. Too narrow for a person. But ... clever. I wonder if the gun was moved through it. The air tightened, like a string pulled taut. Clara's handkerchief tore in her hands. Edward's smile was gone, his eyes hard. Mrs. Poole stood abruptly, muttering about checking on Lily. Lily followed, nearly tripping. Carver leaned back, his fingers tapping his briefcase. Miss Marple sipped her tea, hiding her satisfaction. She'd rattled them, and rattled people made mistakes. The rest of the tea party was polite but tense, everyone eager to leave. As they filed out, Miss Marple caught snippets of talk. Clara whispering to Edward, Mrs. Poole scolding Lily, Carver watching them all. Back at the cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting needles clicking. The tea party had worked. Clara's nerves, Edward's anger, Mrs. Poole's control, Lily's fear, Carver's calm, they were all clues. Someone knew about the passage, the teacup, the lavender, and someone was lying about that night. She pulled out the lavender letter, reading it again. We must talk. Midnight, you know where. The burned notes, wordstats, danger pointed to a secret. Sir Henry had been blackmailing someone, she was sure. Clara, desperate for her mother. Edward, drowning in debt. Mrs. Poole, loyal but bitter. Or Carver, with his smooth lies. Raymond looked up from his typewriter, grinning. Tea party solved the case. Aunt Jane. Or are you still stuck? Miss Marple chuckled, her eyes sharp. Not stuck, dear, just winding the thread. She knitted on, her mind weaving. The passage was the trick, the lavender was the person, and the motive was money or revenge. Tomorrow, she'd set a trap, something to make the killer slip. The truth was close, like a shadow in the corner. Miss Marple would shine a light on it, one careful stitch at a time. Chapter 6. The trap is set. The morning in St. Mary Mead was crisp, with a thin frost sparkling on the grass. Miss Jane Marple sat by Raymond's fireplace, her knitting needles clicking as she turned over the clues in her mind. The letter, the broken teacup, the glass bead, the hidden passage, they were threads in a tangled web, but the shape of Sir Henry Grayson's murder was becoming clear. The locked room, the missing gun, the midnight meeting, they pointed to a clever killer, someone who knew the manor's secrets. Today, Miss Marple would set a trap to catch them. Her tea party yesterday had rattled the household. Clara's nerves, Edward's anger, Mrs. Poole's control, Lily's fear, Mr. Carver's. Someone was hiding the truth, and Miss Marple knew how to make them slip. People got careless when they thought their secrets were in danger. She'd spread a rumor, a little bait, to draw the killer out. By nightfall, she hoped to have her answer. She dressed in her tweed coat, pinned her hat, and tucked her clues into her handbag. The walk to Grayson Manor was quiet, the village still waking up. The manor's gray walls loomed through the morning mist, its chimneys sharp against the sky. The young policeman at the gate nodded, used to her comings and goings. Inside the hall was cold, the air heavy with the weight of the unsolved crime. Miss Marple found Inspector Davies in the drawing room, scribbling notes, his mustache twitching with frustration. "Miss Marple," he said, looking up, "back again. I'm starting to think you live here." She smiled, her eyes twinkling. "Just helping, Inspector. I've been thinking about that passage behind the bookshelf. It's clever, isn't it? I wonder if something was hidden there. Clue, maybe." Davies frowned, setting down his pen. "We checked it. Nothing but dust. You're chasing shadows." Miss Marple nodded, her tone mild. "Perhaps, but I heard a rumor in the village. Someone saw a locket in the study, near the desk, silver, with a rose on it. Could it be important?" Davies' eyes narrowed. "A locket. First I've heard of it. Who told you?" "Oh, just village talk," Miss Marple said, waving a hand. "You know how people gossip. But if it's true, the killer might want it back. Lockets are personal, aren't they?" Davies grunted, skeptical but curious. "If there's a locket, we'll find it, but don't go spreading stories. This case is messy enough." Miss Marple promised to be careful, but her plan was already in motion. She left the manor and headed to the Rose and Crown tea shop, where Mrs. Bantry was sipping tea with her usual flair. Miss Marple joined her, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Dolly," she said, "I need your help. There's a rumor about a locket found in Sir Henry's study silver, with a rose. I want the village to hear it. Can you spread the word?" Mrs. Bantry's eyes lit up, her hat feathers quivering. "A locket? Oh, Jane, that's juicy. Of course I'll tell everyone. By lunch, the whole village will know." Miss Marple smiled, knowing Mrs. Bantry's talent for gossip. "Thank you, Dolly, but be discreet. We don't want to scare anyone." Mrs. Bantry winked, already planning her attack. Miss Marple left the tea shop, her trap set. The locket was a lie, but a good one. If the killer thought a clue was out there, they'd act, maybe return to the study to check. She needed to be ready. She stopped by the post office, where Mrs. Muggins was sorting mail. Miss Marple bought a postcard, then mentioned the locket casually, knowing Mrs. Muggins would tell every customer. Next, she visited Miss Hartnell's dress shop, dropping the same hint while admiring a scarf. By noon, the village was buzzing with talk of the mysterious locket. Miss Marple walked back to the manor, her cane tapping, her heart steady. The bait was out. Now she needed to watch the trap. At the manor, she found Inspector Davies in the hall, looking annoyed. "Your locket story's got everyone in a tizzy," he said. "Clara's asking questions, and Edward's pacing like a caged dog." "What are you playing at?" Miss Marple's eyes were innocent. "Just testing a theory, Inspector. The locket's real. Someone might try to find it. Could we watch the study tonight, just in case?" Davies sighed, rubbing his temples. "You're trouble, Miss Marple, but fine. I'll have a man posted outside the study. You can join us, but stay out of the way." Miss Marple thanked him, her plan falling into place. She spent the afternoon in the village, listening to the gossip she'd started. The baker's wife said Clara had been seen crying again, clutching a silver chain. The butcher's daughter heard Edward muttering about fixing things at the pub. Miss Hartnell swore she'd seen a locket like that on Mrs. Poole years ago. Each whisper tightened the net. As evening fell, Miss Marple returned to the manor, her shawl wrapped tight against the chill. The house was dark, the staff moving quietly. Davies met her in the hall, his face grim. "We're set," he whispered. "My man's in the corridor, hidden by the curtains. The study's locked, but we'll see anyone who tries to get in." "You sure about this?" Miss Marple nodded, her voice soft. "Quite sure, Inspector. People act when they're scared." They settled in a small room across from the study. The door cracked just enough to see the corridor. The manor creaked, its old bones settling in the night. Miss Marple sat, her hands folded, her eyes fixed on the dim hallway. Davies fidgeted, checking his watch. Hours passed, the clock striking 10, then 11. Miss Marple stayed calm, like a cat watching a mouse hole. Just past midnight, a shadow moved in the corridor. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but she didn't stir. The figure was tall, cloaked in a dark coat, their face hidden. They glanced around, then crept to the study door, pulling a key from their pocket. The lock clicked, and they slipped inside, silent as a ghost. Davies tensed, ready to move, but Miss Marple touched his arm, whispering, "Wait, let them show themselves." Inside the study, a faint light flickered, a match, maybe, or a small lamp. Miss Marple strained her ears, catching the soft scrape of wood. The bookshelf. She pictured the hidden passage, the killer checking for the locket that wasn't there. Minutes ticked by, each one heavy. Then the door creaked open, and the figure stepped out, something glinting in their hand. "Now," Miss Marple whispered. Doptovy sprang up, his whistle shrill. The policeman in the corridor lunged, grabbing the figure's arm. The cloak fell back, revealing Edward Grayson, his face pale, his eyes wild. In his hand was a silver locket, its rose engraving catching the light. "Edward," Davies barked. "What's this?" Breaking into the study, Edward struggled, but the policeman held him tight. "Let me go. I was just looking for something. It's mine." Miss Marple stepped forward, her voice calm. "Yours, Mr. Grayson, or Sir Henry's. Why come at midnight?" Edward's jaw clenched, his eyes darting. I heard about the locket. Thought it might be important. That's all." Miss Marple tilted her head, her eyes sharp. "Important enough to sneak in, through the passage, perhaps." Edward froze, his face draining of color. Davies frowned, confused. "Passage, he used the door." Miss Marple nodded, her trap sprung. "Yes, but he knew about the passage." "Didn't you, Edward? You checked it, looking for something you thought was hidden, something that could point to you." Edward shook his head, his voice rising. "You're crazy. I don't know anything about a passage." Miss Marple's smile was gentle, but her words were steel. "We'll see, dear. Inspector, perhaps you should search him." And the study. Davies signaled his man, who patted Edward down. In his pocket was a small key, not the study key, but something smaller, maybe for the passage panel. Inside the study, the bookshelf was ajar, the hidden gap exposed. Davies cursed, impressed, despite himself. "You planned this, didn't you?" he said to Miss Marple, almost accusing. She shrugged, her eyes twinkling. "Just a guess, Inspector. People act when they're scared." Edward was taken to the drawing room, still protesting. While Davies searched the study, Miss Marple followed, watching quietly. Near the bookshelf, she spotted a faint mark on the floor, a scuff, as if something heavy had been dragged. She knelt, ignoring her knees, and found another glass bead, identical to the one in her pocket. She tucked it away, her theory growing. Back in the drawing room, Edward sat, his hands cuffed, his charm gone. Clara stood by the window, her face pale. Mrs. Poole hovered near Lily, who was crying softly. Mr. Carver watched from a corner, his briefcase clutched. Miss Marple studied them, her mind weaving the clues. "Edward," she said, her voice kind but firm, "why the locket? What were you afraid we'd find?" He glared, his voice low. "It's nothing, a keepsake. You've got no proof." Miss Marple nodded, undeterred. "Perhaps, but the passage, the locket, the lavender scent, they tell a story. Sir Henry was killed by someone who knew the manor's secrets, someone who used that passage to hide the gun, someone who left a teacup, a bead, a letter." Clara gasped, her hand at her throat. Mrs. Poole's eyes narrowed. Lily whimpered, hiding behind the housekeeper. Carver's fingers tightened on his briefcase. Edward's face was a mask, but his eyes betrayed fear. Davies stepped in, holding the locket. "It's got a picture inside," he said. "A woman, young. Who is she, Edward?" Edward's lips parted, but no words came. Miss Marple leaned closer, her voice soft. "Is it someone Sir Henry knew? Someone he was meeting at midnight?" Edward shook his head, but the fight was draining from him. Miss Marple knew she was close. The locket was a link, maybe to the lavender letter, maybe to the killer's motive. She needed one more push, one more night to unravel the rest. "Inspector," she said, "keep Edward here, and watch the study. The truth is near." Davies nodded, grudgingly impressed. "You're full of surprises, Miss Marple. But if this goes wrong, it's on you." She smiled, her eyes sharp. "It won't, dear." Back at Raymond's cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting needles clicking. The trap had worked. Edward was caught. But was he the killer? The locket, the passage, the lavender, they pointed to a deeper secret, one Sir Henry had died for. She pulled out her clues, studying the glass bead, the teacup shard, the letter, the burned notes, words, debts. Danger hinted at blackmail. Had Edward killed to keep a secret? Or was someone else pulling the strings? Raymond looked up grinning. Caught your man, Aunt Jane. Or is the locked room still winning? Miss Marple chuckled, her needles steady. Not winning, dear. Just waiting, she knitted on, her mind racing. Tomorrow, she'd gather the household and lay out the truth. The killer was close, their masks slipping. Miss Marple would peel it off, one careful stitch at a time. Chapter 7. The Impossible Explained. The morning sun broke through the clouds over St. Mary Mead, casting a golden glow on the village's thatched roofs. Miss Jane Marple sat at Raymond's kitchen table, her tea untouched, her mind weaving the final threads of Sir Henry Grayson's murder. The lavender-scented letter, the broken teacup, the glass beads, the hidden passage, the silver locket, they were all pieces of a puzzle, and last night's trap had brought the picture into focus. Edward Grayson had been caught sneaking into the study, but was he the killer? Miss Marple wasn't sure yet. Today, she'd gather the household and lay out the truth, letting the killer's own fear betray them. She dressed in her tweed skirt and cardigan, pinned her hat, and tucked her clues into her handbag. The walk to Grayson Manor was quiet, the air crisp with the promise of a clear day. The manor's gray walls stood stern against the bright sky, its windows like eyes hiding secrets. The young policeman at the gate waved her through, his face curious. Inside the hall was still, the chandelier glinting faintly. Miss Marple's cane tapped as she climbed the stairs, her heart steady but her senses sharp. Inspector Davies met her in the drawing room, his mustache bristling with impatience. Edward Grayson sat in a corner, his hands cuffed, his face pale but defiant. Clara Grayson stood by the window, her eyes red from crying. Mrs. Poole, the housekeeper, hovered near the door, her gray dress stiff as ever. Lily, the maid, twisted, her apron, her cheeks flushed. Mr. Carver, the lawyer, sat with his briefcase, his sharp face unreadable. The air was thick with tension, like a storm waiting to break. Miss Marple, Davies said, crossing his arms, you said you've got answers. Let's hear them. Edward's caught, but I'm not convinced he's our man. Miss Marple smiled, settling into a chair. Thank you, Inspector. Let's talk about Sir Henry's death. A man shot in a locked room, no gun found, no way in or out. It seems impossible, but nothing is impossible when you know people. Shall we begin? She pulled the lavender letter from her handbag, holding it up. This was in the study, hidden under a book. It says, we must talk. Midnight. You know where. It smells of lavender, a scent I noticed in the room. Someone met Sir Henry that night. Someone he trusted enough to unlock the door for Clara's hands twitched, her handkerchief crumpling. Edward's jaw tightened, his eyes on the floor. Mrs. Poole stood rigid, her lips a thin line. Lily whimpered, softly, and Carver's fingers tapped his briefcase. Miss Marple continued, her voice calm. Then there's the teacup, broken on the floor. Sir Henry drank coffee, not tea. Yet this cup was there, with roses on it. Odd, isn't it? And the glass beads, one on the windowsill, another near the bookshelf. They're from a dress or necklace, something a woman might wear. Clara's hand went to her throat, as if checking for a chain. Mrs. Poole's eyes narrowed, and Lily's apron twisted tighter. Miss Marple's gaze moved to the locket, which Davies held up. This locket, she said, was what Edward was looking for last night. Silver, with a rose, matching the teacup's pattern. Inside is a picture of a young woman. Who is she, Edward? Edward glared, his voice low. It's nothing. A keepsake. You're making this up. Miss Marple shook her head, her eyes kind, but firm. I don't think so. Let's talk about the passage behind the bookshelf. Too small for a person, but perfect for moving something like a gun. I believe the killer used it to hide the weapon, making the crime seem impossible. Davies leaned forward, intrigued. Go on. How'd they do it? Miss Marple folded her hands. The key is timing. Everyone assumed Sir Henry was shot at midnight, when the household was asleep. But what if he was killed earlier? The shot was muffled, maybe by a pillow, and the killer used a trick to fool us. A phonograph, hidden in the study, played a gunshot sound later, making us think the murder was fresh. The room went still. Clara's eyes widened, and Edward's head snapped up. Mrs. Poole's face was a mask, but her hands clenched. Lily gasped, hiding behind the housekeeper. Carver's tapping stopped, his eyes locked on Miss Marple. A phonograph. Davies said, skeptical. That's a stretch. Miss Marple smiled. Is it? Sir Henry had one in the study, tucked in a corner. I saw it my first visit. The killer set it to play at midnight, then locked the room and left. The gun was pulled through the passage with a string, vanishing before anyone checked. Davies rubbed his chin, half convinced. And the killer? You're saying Edward? Miss Marple turned to Edward, her voice gentle. Edward, you knew the passage. You sneaked in last night, looking for the locket. Why? Was it yours, or someone else's? Edward's face reddened, his voice rising. I told you, it's just a keepsake. You've got no proof. Miss Marple nodded, undeterred. Perhaps, but let's look at motives. Sir Henry was a hard man, rich but stingy. He argued with Clara over money for her sick mother. He refused Edward's loans, knowing about his gambling debts. He clashed with Mrs. Poole, who served him for years but hid her own bitterness. And Mr. Carver, Sir Henry's will was being changed, wasn't it? Did that worry you? Carver's smile was thin. I'm a lawyer. Miss Marple wills are my job. I had no reason to harm him. Miss Marple tilted her head. Maybe, but someone did. Someone Sir Henry was blackmailing. The burned note in the fireplace mentioned debts and danger. He knew a secret, and it cost him his life. Clara's handkerchief tore, a small rip echoing in the quiet. Edward's hands shook, his cuffs rattling. Mrs. Poole's eyes darted to Lily, who was trembling. Miss Marple pressed on, her voice steady. Let's piece it together, she said. The killer met Sir Henry before midnight, bringing a teacup perhaps to seem friendly. They argued, and the cup broke in the struggle. The killer shot him, muffled the sound, and set the phonograph to play later. They locked the door, using Sir Henry's key, and pulled the gun through the passage. The lavender scent was theirs, left on the letter and in the air. The glass beads fell from their clothing, maybe a beaded dress. She paused, watching their faces. Clara was pale, her eyes glassy. Edward's defiance was crumbling, his shoulders slumped. Mrs. Poole's control was slipping, her hands twisting. Lily was sobbing now, clinging to the housekeeper. Carver's calm was strained, his eyes cold. Miss Marple held up the locket. This locket is the key. Edward, you risked everything to get it. Why? Because it points to the woman in the picture, someone Sir Henry was blackmailing, someone you care about. Edward's head jerked up, his eyes wide. Leave her out of this. She's got nothing to do with it. The room froze. Clara gasped, her hand covering her mouth. Mrs. Poole stepped forward, her voice sharp. Be quiet, Edward. Don't say another word. Miss Marple's heart raced, but her face stayed calm. Who? Edward, Clara, Mrs. Poole, or someone else? Edward's lips parted, but Mrs. Poole cut in, her voice like ice. Enough of this nonsense. You're accusing everyone. Miss Marple, Edward's a fool, but he's no killer. Miss Marple turned to her, her eyes piercing. Mrs. Poole, you've been loyal to this house for years. But loyalty can hide anger. Did Sir Henry wrong you? Did he know something about your past? Mrs. Poole's face flushed, her hands clenching. How dare you? I served him faithfully. Miss Marple nodded, then looked at Clara. Clara, you argued with your uncle. Did he threaten you? Was the locket yours? Clara shook her head, tears streaming. No, I didn't kill him, I swear. Miss Marple's gaze shifted to Lily, who was shaking, her eyes huge. Lily, you saw a stranger that night, but you also saw something else, didn't you? Something in the study. Lily sobbed, her voice breaking. I saw the teacup. It was on the tray, but it wasn't mine. I didn't say, because ... Because Mrs. Poole grabbed her arm, hissing, quiet, girl. Miss Marple's voice was soft but firm. Let her speak, Mrs. Poole. Lily, who brought the teacup? Lily's sobs grew louder, her words tumbling out. It was ... It was Edward. I saw him, with it, going to the study. I didn't know why, I swear. Edward lunged forward, his cuffs clanking. She's lying. I never touched a teacup. Miss Marple raised a hand, silencing him. Edward, you brought the teacup to seem harmless, didn't you? You met Sir Henry, argued, and shot him. You set the phonograph, locked the door, and used the passage to hide the gun. The locket was yours or hers, the woman you're protecting. Edward's face collapsed, his voice a whisper. You don't understand. I had to. He was ruining her. Miss Marple leaned closer, her voice gentle. Who, Edward? Tell us. He shook his head, tears in his eyes. I won't. You can't make me. Miss Marple sighed, her heart heavy. She turned to Davies, who was watching, stunned. Inspector, search the passage again. Look for a string or wire, and check the phonograph. The proof is there. Davies nodded, signaling his men. They hurried to the study, leaving the household in silence. Clara sank into a chair, sobbing. Mrs. Poole stood frozen, her eyes on Edward. Lily clung to her, still crying. Carver's face was unreadable, but his hands were tight on his briefcase. Minutes later, a policeman returned, holding a thin string and a small phonograph record. Found these in the passage, he said. The record's got a gunshot sound, just like she said. Davies stared at Miss Marple, his jaw dropping. How did you know? She smiled, her eyes twinkling. People are predictable, Inspector. Edward's motive was money and love. The locket's picture is of a woman he cared for, someone Sir Henry was blackmailing. He killed to protect her, and to inherit the fortune. Edward's head bowed, his voice broken. He was going to ruin her. My sister. She made a mistake years ago, and he knew. He wanted everything, her money, her life. I couldn't let him, Clara gasped, her eyes wide. Your sister, but ... she's not here. Miss Marple nodded. She's not, but the locket is hers. Edward kept it, a reminder of his promise to save her. Isn't that right? Edward nodded, tears falling. I'm sorry. I didn't want to kill him, but he left me no choice. Davies stepped forward, his voice gruff. That's enough. Edward Grayson, you're under arrest for the murder of Sir Henry Grayson. The policeman led Edward away, his head low. Clara collapsed, sobbing. Mrs. Poole guided Lily out, her face pale but composed. Carver stood, his briefcase in hand, and left without a word. Miss Marple watched them go, her heart heavy but her mind clear. Davies turned to her, shaking his head. You're a marvel, Miss Marple. A phonograph, a passage, a locket. I'd never have guessed. She chuckled, standing. Just a matter of listening, Inspector. Pip will tell you everything, if you know how to hear. She left the manor, the sun warm on her face. The case was solved, the impossible explained. Edward had killed for love and money, using the manor's secrets to hide his crime. The lavender was his sister's scent, left on the letter and locket. The teacup was his ruse, the beads from her dress, forgotten in the struggle. Back at Raymond's cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting needles clicking. Raymond looked up, grinning. Solved it, Aunt Jane. The locked room's no match for you. She smiled, her eyes sharp. Just a puzzle, dear, and puzzles always have answers. Knitted on, the manor's secrets untangled, the truth laid bare, one stitch at a time. Chapter 8. Justice and Reflection. The afternoon sun bathed St. Mary Mead in a soft golden light, making the village's cottages glow like they belonged in a painting. Miss Jane Marple walked slowly back to Raymond's cottage, her cane tapping the cobblestone path, her handbag heavy with the clues she'd carried for days, the lavender-scented letter, the broken teacup shard, the glass beads, the silver locket. Sir Henry Grayson's murder was solved, the impossible locked room mystery unraveled. Edward Grayson, the killer, was in custody, his confessions still ringing in her ears. Yet Miss Marple's heart was heavy. Justice was done, but it came with a cost, like a sweater knitted with too tight stitches. She reached the cottage, its rosebushes nodding in the breeze. Inside, the fire crackled, and Raymond was at his typewriter, clacking away at his latest story. He looked up, his grin wide. Well, Aunt Jane, he said, leaning back, you did it again. Cracked the unsolvable case. The village won't stop talking about you. Miss Marple chuckled, easing into her armchair. Oh, Raymond, it's not about talk. It's about truth. And truth is never as tidy as people want. She set her handbag on the table, pulling out her knitting. Her needles clicked, steady and familiar. As she thought back to the morning at Grayson Manor, the drawing room had been thick with shock after Edward's confession. Clara had sobbed, her face buried in her hands. Unable to believe her cousin's betrayal, Mrs. Poole had stood stiff, her eyes cold but her hands trembling. Lily had clung to the housekeeper, her tears soaking her apron. Mr. Carver had slipped out quietly, his briefcase clutched like a shield. Inspector Davies, for once, had looked at Miss Marple with something like respect. Edward, Miss Marple had said, her voice gentle but firm, why did you do it? Tell us the whole story. Edward, his hands cuffed, had slumped in his chair, his defiance gone. His voice was low, broken. It was for my sister Anne. She's not here. She lives in London. Years ago, she made a mistake, got mixed up with a bad man. Sir Henry found out. He had proof letters, photos, He was blackmailing her, draining her savings, threatening to tell everyone. She's got a family now, a good life. I couldn't let him ruin it. Clara had gasped, her eyes wide. But she hasn't been here in years. Edward nodded, tears in his eyes. I know. I kept her secret. But Sir Henry wouldn't stop. He wanted everything, her money, mine, the estate. I begged him to let her go. He laughed, said he'd own us all. So I lied, planned it. Miss Marple had listened, her heart aching. Greed and fear were old stories, but they never lost their sting. How did you do it, Edward? She asked. He'd taken a shaky breath, his voice barely a whisper. I knew the manor's secrets. My grandfather showed me the passage behind the bookshelf when I was a kid. Too small for a person, but perfect for hiding things. I brought Anne's locket too. The study said I wanted to talk about her. I used her teacup, one she'd left here years ago, to seem friendly. We argued. He got angry, grabbed the cup, and it broke. I shot him, used a pillow to muffle the sound. It was quick. Davies had leaned forward, his notebook out. And the locked room, the missing gun. Edward's eyes had dropped to the floor. I set up the phonograph to play a gunshot at midnight, so everyone would think that's when it happened. I locked the door with his key, then used a string to pull the gun through the passage. It's still there, hidden in the wall. I burned Anne's letter, but I missed some of it. The lavender was hers. She always wore that scent. The beads were from her dress, one she wore when she visited last. Miss Marple had nodded, the pieces clicking into place. The teacup, the lavender, the beads, they were traces of Anne, left by Edward's desperate plan. The locket was his mistake, a keepsake he couldn't let go. When he'd heard the rumor about it, he'd panicked, sneaking into the study to retrieve it, only to fall into her trap. Davies had stood, his voice gruff. That's enough. Take him to the station. The policeman had led Edward away, his head bowed. Clara had collapsed into a chair, her sobs echoing. Mrs. Poole had guided Lily out, her face pale but composed. Miss Marple had stayed a moment, watching the room empty, the weight of the truth settling like dust. She'd left the manor, her work done, but her mind still turning over the human cost of it all. Now, in the cottage, she knitted her needles, moving in rhythm with her thoughts. Raymond leaned forward, his eyes bright. Come on, Aunt Jane, tell me the details. How'd you figure it out? The phonograph, the passage that's straight out of a novel. Miss Marple smiled, her eyes twinkling. It's not so grand, dear. People are like knitting patterns, complicated. But if you follow the stitches, you see the shape. Edward was desperate, and desperate people make plans. The passage was old, part of the manor's bones. The phonograph was clever, but simple. I saw it in the study, tucked away, and thought, what if? The rest was just listening. Raymond shook his head, amazed. Listening. You make it sound easy. The police were stumped, but you walked in and solved it in a week. Miss Marple's needles paused, her voice soft. Not easy, Raymond. People's hearts are messy. Edward killed, for love, but also for greed. He wanted and safe, but he also wanted Sir Henry's money. That locket wasn't just a clue, it was his heart, tied to his sister. I wish it hadn't ended this way. Raymond frowned, leaning back. You feel sorry for him. He's a murderer. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes distant. I do, not for what he did, but for why. Sir Henry was cruel, squeezing people until they broke. Edward broke first. It's sad, like a sweater unraveled by one bad pull. She picked up the locket from her handbag, turning it in her fingers. The silver gleamed, the rose engraving delicate. Inside was a faded photo of Anne, her face young and hopeful. Miss Marple sighed, setting it down. She'd give it to Davies later, for evidence. For now, it was a reminder of the human side of crime, love twisted into something dark. The afternoon passed quietly. Miss Marple walked to the village, her shawl wrapped against the cooling air. She stopped at the Rose and Crown tea shop, where Mrs. Bantry was waiting, her hat feathers bouncing with excitement. Jane, Mrs. Bantry called, waving her over. You're the talk of the village. Edward Grayson, a killer, and that locked room trick. It's unbelievable. Miss Marple sat, accepting a cup of tea. Not so unbelievable, Dolly, just clever. Edward used what he knew of the manor, his sister's pain. But he couldn't hide everything. Mrs. Bant leaned in, her eyes wide. Tell me everything. The locket, the lavender. How did you know? Miss Marple sipped her tea, her voice calm. Little things, Dolly. The lavender was Anne's. left on the letter and locket. The teacup was hers, too, a mistake Edward made. The beads fell from her dress, forgotten in the struggle. The passage was the manor's secret, one he learned as a boy. I just followed the threads. Mrs. Bantry shook her head, amazed. You're a wonder, Jane. What happens now? Edward's locked up, but what about Clara and the manor? Miss Marple's eyes softened. Clara will heal, in time. She's young, and she's strong. The manor will pass to her, I expect. Since Edward's out, Sir Henry's money will help her mother's care. As for the rest, life goes on, Dolly, it always does. She left the tea shop, the village humming around her. The baker waved, the postmistress called out, the seamstress nodded from her shop. St. Mary Mead was itself again, the murderer's story to tell over tea. Miss Marple walked to the church, where Mrs. Clement was arranging flowers. She sat in a pew, her hands folded, her mind quiet. Jane, Mrs. Clement said, smiling, you've done it again. The vicar says you're a blessing to this village. Miss Marple chuckled, her eyes warm. Just an old lady with time to think. Mary, the world's full of puzzles, and I like solving them. Mrs. Clement sat beside her, her voice soft. Do you ever get tired of it? The secrets, the sadness. Miss Marple's fingers traced her cane, her voice thoughtful. Sometimes, but every puzzle teaches me something. People hurt, they hide, they hope. Edward wanted to save his sister, but he lost himself. Sir Henry wanted power, but it killed him. It's all part of the pattern. She left the church, the sun dipping low, painting the sky pink. Back at the cottage, she sat by the fire, her knitting needles clicking. Raymond was still typing, his story growing. He looked up, his grin teasing. Ready for the next mystery, Aunt Jane? Or are you retiring after this one? Miss Marple laughed, her eyes sharp. Retiring? Oh no, dear. As long as there are people, there'll be puzzles, and I'll be here, knitting them apart. She leaned back, her needles steady, her mind at peace. The manor's secrets were out, Edward's crime laid bare, justice served. The lavender, the locket, the passage, they were just tools, used by a man who loved too fiercely and hated too deeply. Miss Marple thought of her knitting, how a single loose thread could unravel a whole piece. Edward's thread had been his sister, and it had pulled him undone. She finished a row, her stitches neat, her heart calm. St. Mary Mead was quiet again, but she knew it wouldn't stay that way. People were messy, their lives a tangle of hopes and fears. Another puzzle would come, another knot to untie. Until then, she'd knit, and watch, and listen. The truth was always there, waiting for one careful stitch.